Do you have scraps but no sewing machine? Or do you just not like a sewing machine? I have both. I have scraps and sewing machine, but I love to hand sew. And there are so many things that I can make hand sewing that I can't really do as well on a sewing machine. This circle and swirls quilt pattern is an example of that. It's very hard to get this kind of play and texture when you're sewing on a sewing machine in these items here. But with hand sewing, I can manipulate, fold, bend, pull, twist, do whatever I need to do to get the texture and the look and the swirls that I want here in these circles. Now, you may recognize this as my Circles and Swirls quilt. And it started out to be a lap quilt, but the more my husband and I looked at it, we thought this would make a beautiful quilt wall hanging. And so that's what I'm decided to do with it. I have 9 squares here. Okay. And it measures right at 19 inches square. So it's going to be a perfect wall hanging size. And I have a perfect spot to hang it in too. So I wanted to tell you about a little about how I approach hand sewing. You know, tips are great, but they don't work for everybody. You need to know that right off the bat. So take what you can, take what works for you, and just throw out the rest. You don't have to pay attention to it, okay? One thing about hand sewing, what I call the wild and free way, is you do what you want to do. You put the kind of stitching in you want to put in. You put in the kind of stitching that fits what you're doing or gives you the look you want, or you can use the thread you want. You can do whatever, all right? So in hand sewing, the first tip I have is do it your way. Do it your way. Whatever you want to do it your way. My motto here, as you know, is do you very well. Figure out who you are, what you like, and then do you very well. What I'm doing here is sewing down the sashing, and I'm doing it in just a straight overcast stitch. They're not all regular and even. They're little wonky doodled, and that's okay. That's doing it my way. I'm a very wild and free sewer, and I like to do it my way. Perfectly imperfect, okay? Now, another tip is I work with scraps, and I think that's a wonderful way to start hand sewing, is to work with scraps. Because when you work with scraps, you make mistakes, and things don't come out exactly the way you think they should, you don't feel so bad because you just started with scraps. And you don't feel like you've lost anything, as contrary to going buying expensive fabrics and then thinking, this is going in a drawer. It'll never see the light of day because it just didn't turn out right, okay? So start with scraps. Start out with any threads that you might have. You don't have to have specialty threads just to hand sew. If you notice that most everything I sew is with embroidery floss, and I'll tell you why. Several years ago, at an estate sale, I picked up probably around 500 of these little things here, every color and you can imagine. And evidently somebody was a cross stitcher or an embroiderer, and they just had just collected such a collection. There had to be at least 500 of those. Then about 2 weeks later, I went to a garage sale, and this lady owned a craft store, and for some reason she was having to sell everything, and she was selling it cheap. So I probably bought another 500. So I ended up with a good 1,000 of those little things. Now, like I said, this has been a few years back, so I am probably now down to, let's see, 4 of these cases full and a little bag. And so you can see that I've gone through a lot of embroidery floss. I've used it in everything in the world that you could sew. I use mostly 2 strands, and that is really strong, and it just works beautifully. I love color. If you can't tell that by looking at my channel, you definitely need to see a doctor, because you probably have color blindness. Because I love color and it's everywhere. So use whatever thread you have. Probably the only thread that I bought was I bought a few spools that were $10 spools that were on sale for $1 a piece. You know, I can't pass that up. And then I bought a couple spools of quilting thread that I use occasionally for specific projects. And that's it. And so use what you got. Batting. If you have friends that use batting, that quilt or anything like that, and they have offcuts, make sure you ask them to save their offcuts for you. Just throw them in a bag and you'll pick them up, because so many times those offcuts are just perfect for the little projects that you want to hand sew. Otherwise, normally I will just wait till batting goes on sale, and somewhere, Amazon or Hobby Lobby or somewhere, somebody's got it on sale, then I will buy a roll or 2. I like cotton. I don't like polyester. I like cotton batting. And so that's what I'll do. And I use a lot of it. I love it as foundation piece because it gives me substantial weight, makes me feel like my pieces are strong, and it's easy to sew through, and I can put a foundation fabric on top, and that's just great too. So my tip is to make sure you scour around for your friends and thrift shops and craft stores, and wait for sales to get that batting that you want. So you're using any threads on hand, you're using scraps, and you're collecting batting. Okay, so those are 3 good tips to improving your hand stitching. Now, if you want to go to the trouble of learning different stitches, there are all kinds of YouTube channels and videos on different kinds of stitches. Most of my things are stitched with a plain running stitch, overcast stitch. That's about it. Every once in a while I'll use some embroidery stitches, like French knots, or stem stitching or back stitching or something like that. In all my pieces, I probably don't use more than 5 or 6 stitches altogether. So you don't have to do much. So another tip is just Just learn 5 basic stitches. That's all you got to do. And you can get on down the road with just that. Okay. Now, learn to tie off a knot. And the way my grandmother showed me is the way I've continued to do it. There are other ways, and they're good. So if you run across something you like better, jump on it. But when I come to the back, I make a just a stitch that holds everything down. That's not the word I need, but I can't think of it right now. Stabilizes. Okay, stabilizes where I'm at. Then I go in and I make a small stitch with a loop that I leave big enough to get my needle through once and twice from the same direction. Loop it through that loop twice from the same direction and then pull it, and it makes a tight little knot. And then you clip an 1/8 to 1/4 of an inch away from that knot. Okay. All right, let's look at what we got here. Okay. I have all my sashing down. All my squares are made. Well, now what I need is 2 more of these centerpieces. I have one made that I'm fixing to use. This is a 2-inch square for this. These are blocks were cut 6.5 by 6.5 actual blocks, and then I made the circles. And there is a playlist on this Circles and Squirrels. Squirrels. Oh my, Circles and Swirl quilt. If you would like to follow this pattern, there's a playlist for it. It's in the description of this video. And everything you need to know there to make your circles and swirls. I did it again. Oh no. I'm going to have to change the name of this quilt. Circle and Swirls. And all these circles are made using old scarves. Just cut up scarves, or stripped or torn scarf strips. That's how these were made. And so again, it's all scraps. Okay. All right. I'm just going to go around this with an overcast stitch. And I have some thread here that I'm going to get 2 strands from. I forgot how many tips I already went through, but another thing is you don't need a seminar and classes to hand stitch. Just grab a needle and grab a thread and start stitching. If you don't have anything but 2 pieces of scrap, sew them together. And sew them together again and sew them together again. Until you feel comfortable with the rhythm, with how the needle feels going through the fabric. There's several things that will become, the more you do it, just become part of you, second nature. How much pressure, how far do you want your stitches apart, what your rhythm is, how you eyeball and keep your stitching line straight. These things just, for me, just happened as I stitched more and more. Okay. If you want to get real formal, again, there are all kinds of videos out there. I'm a wild and free stitcher on everything. And all that means is I don't sweat it. I just do it. Just do it. Things that you learn, like for instance, when I take this, I have a finger, you can probably see it right there. I have a finger that's right behind this. I can feel that needle as I go down, and then I just come back up. Lots of times I will stitch with my finger right behind it. I don't poke myself, I don't bleed. If it's a little tougher to get through, I move my finger before that needle goes through. But it really helps me to keep my edges sharp, my stitching more even. There's just something about that that I feel like I have more control. Now, if you were to watch other stitchers, you would see they have their own, every stitcher has their own little quirks and technique and style, and how they hold their needle, how they hold their fabric, how they stab the fabric. All that is just unique to each stitcher. Watch different stitchers on YouTube. Just watch them as they stitch. See what they're doing. Try to pick up on the little things that just aren't obvious. A lot of times when we're trying to explain what we're doing, we skip stuff because it's so common to us that we don't think about it. Telling someone what we're doing, just like me telling you that I've got a finger back here behind this that I'm using actually to stabilize, to gauge. We just don't think about it. So try to pick up on some things that are just not obvious, okay? Don't try to be perfect. If you can throw perfect out the door the very first time you go through it, you are going to do yourself the biggest favor in the world. Perfect, if you want to do it, comes much further down the line. You got to do all the imperfect first before you know what perfect is. And let me tell you, perfect differs with each person. What I do is messy and childlike to some people, but to me, it's perfect. And so you need to figure that out too as you go along. What is your gauge for perfect? And do you even want to do that? Okay. The other thing is pick small things to start with. I can't tell you how many people I've seen through the years that start to hand sew and quit only because they started with a king-size bed quilt. I'm thinking, oh my, you'll never finish that. And sure enough, they did not. It's just too much to bite off. And so start small. Make a pot holder. Make a bookmark. Make a placemat. Make a table runner. Make a wall hanging. And then maybe tackle that quilt that you wanted to make for your bed. But start small. Okay. Get several projects behind you. Look at your progress. Look at your stitching from your first one to your 10th one, and look how much you've grown and how much you've improved and how confident you are now to where you were when you began. Anything basically you can sew in a sewing machine, you can hand stitch. But there's a whole lot of things that you can't sew on a sewing machine that you can hand stitch. Another thing about hand stitching is that hand stitching is, you will find, very therapeutic as well as functional. There is something that goes along with hand stitching that just doesn't happen when you're sewing on a machine. I think it's the feel of the texture of everything. I think it's the rhythm of the needle in your hand. I think it's the satisfaction when you feel that needle puncture go through, and then you pull it up and you've got that nice pretty little stitch. There's just something very therapeutic about it. Usually you're at a desk or you're in a comfortable chair, you're relaxed, you're in front of the television, you're talking to your significant other, or you're just alone sitting by a window enjoying the view while you sit there and stitch. It's just so conducive to well-being, to a sense of wellness and peace, security. But again, you'll have to do it to believe it, okay? When I was little, I was fortunate because I was born at a time when women did a lot of hand stitching. And I got to spend time with my grandmother and my aunts. Now, my mother hated it. My mother taught me how to sew on buttons. My dad taught me how to embroider. And my grandmother and aunts taught me how to quilt and hand sew and make my own patterns, and to really set me on the road to designing my own things. But today, young people just don't have that in their lives. So they come to places like YouTube to find that. If they have an interest in it, they come here. And that's a good thing. I love YouTube for that reason. I mean, I've been stitching for decades, but I love to watch other artisans on YouTube. I love to watch them stitch. It's just beautiful and relaxing. And I learn things and pick up tips. It's just no end to that part of it. Oh, that turned out really cute. I like that. Okay, that just blended in really well. Let's tie it off. Stabilize the stitch. Make a loop. Go through it twice from the same direction. And pull. One more circle, and then it will be time to add the backing. And I will be adding the backing and quilting around these squares, and then put a binding on for this quilt, and then putting a casing to hang it by. So stay tuned to see what happens to this circle and swirls quilt that shrunk to a wall hanging. Until next time, stay scrap happy.